Thanks so much for joining us today, Representative Crockett. I know the big issue everyone's talking about right now is the debt ceiling. What do you think that President Biden and the Democrats in Congress should do in the standoff with the Republicans?
I think that we should hold strong. I mean, the reality is that the Republicans are asking for something that is unreasonable and something that, frankly, is unfair, not just to our constituents, but to their constituents as well. They are wanting to cut access to SNAP benefits in a time where people are still trying to recover from the pandemic. When they're still struggling through inflationary costs. And we know that statistically, rural America is actually using SNAP benefits at the highest rate, right? And most rural Americans are represented by Republicans. So the one thing that I would want people to know is that this isn't a fight that is a partisan fight, even though they're making it that. We're actually fighting for our veterans. We're fighting for our women. We're fighting for those that are on Medicaid and Medicare, which once again, those in rural America stand to lose the most if they lose that access. So we're fighting for everyone, and seemingly the Republicans right now are only fighting for their rich donors.
Yeah, yeah. So Texas has some of the most restrictive abortion laws since the fall of Roe v. Wade. What is it that you think that Congress and the Biden administration can do to try to push back against states like Texas, which have really taken extreme positions on abortion?
Yeah, so I knew that the next stance was going to be, them going straight to Texas, trying to make sure that they could get something in play that would align with a national ban on abortion. So I think that it's really important that, number one, we make it clear that no state, especially these crazy southern states, should be allowed to say that a resident of their state is disallowed from leaving the state to go and seek the health care that they need. Because I think that that's the next move, is that they're going to try to limit interstate commerce, which falls directly under our jurisdiction. And so we know that, the state of Texas has decided that they want to punish people criminally. And so we just saw the testimony of an amazing and brave woman, Amanda, out of the state of Texas, when she sat before the Senate and she talked about her experience, her near-death experience. And what I think is really important to understand is the reason that we didn't lose the way that the pundits said that we were going to lose in the midterms was really because the Republicans have decided that they're going to be extreme. And I hate to call them Republicans because honestly, these MAGA folk are giving Republicans a bad name. And that's saying a lot, especially coming from me, right? But this is not the same party. It's just like they always try to school us and give us a history lesson on who the Democrats used to be. But we're not talking about the old Democratic Party. We're talking about the current Democratic Party. And right now, as far as I'm concerned, there is no Republican Party. There's only MAGA, radical, right extremist, and they don't align with really too many folk in this country. And so long as they continue to seek these very radical positions, I think that will only inure to the benefit of the Democrats.
I know that you're a civil rights lawyer. What do you think the Congress can do on some of these criminal justice reform issues? That's one, ideally, what would you like to see? And what do you think is realistically possible in this sort of divided government we have?
Well, I'll just start with your last question first. I don't think very much is possible with this divided government, unfortunately, not on common sense things that make sense for everyone. Just this week, we did drop a bill. We'll see. I have a Republican co-lead on it, and this bill follows up on a criminal justice reform that I was pushing for in the state house, that now the Texas State House has finally decided they want to follow my lead now that I'm gone. But that is to help out with the fentanyl crisis, right? Like, Republicans like to stoke fear and say, oh, fentanyl, and it's because of the border, and it's because of the Democrats. And, they've gotten real quiet about the border ever since Title 42 ended and the numbers were down. They don't really have much to say, right? But they keep trying to say this fentanyl is pouring across. Well, the reality is that we've been having a lot of drugs, a lot of dope pouring across all the borders, right? And so this idea that you can build a wall and now all the drugs will be gone is a farce. But right now we are actually about to go and vote. And that vote is to increase penalties as it relates to drugs. We saw what happened with the 94 crime bill. So you can only guess which way I'm voting on this. I'm not voting that way because that doesn't save lives. We've seen this play out. And so what we've done is a lot of people that OD on fentanyl, they're actually not trying to take fentanyl, right? They don't know that the drugs are laced with fentanyl. And so we're trying to decriminalize fentanyl testing strips so that they're not considered paraphernalia, so that people can actually test the drugs that they're using, because I look at addiction as an illness. And so we need to treat the illnesses. We need to treat the root causes of the illnesses. And we also need to make sure that we're saving lives and punishing the people that are peddling drugs. We've already got that on the books. Clearly, that is not deterring people, right? And so increasing those penalties, I don't think is going to save more lives. I think that this is a smart piece of legislation. I also filed tons of bills as it relates to marijuana decriminalization on the state level. I think that we've got a lot of leeway considering the fact that the majority of the states have actually legalized marijuana in some way. It's time to go ahead and give those federal protections and officially legalize marijuana. Those states that want to be engaged, they can be engaged. But this also protects our small business owners that have decided that they were going to engage because they still can't put their money in a bank, which makes their businesses that much more or that much less safe as they are trying to conduct business. So those are just some of the things. Obviously, we know that drug crimes historically have been discretionary crimes, which means that you can decide that you're going to use someone as an informant and never, ever actually prosecute them, or you can prosecute them. And we've seen that historically, there's been a disproportionate amount of folk that are Black and brown that are prosecuted for these crimes. And those numbers are disproportionate to who we know are committing the crimes, right? So this would be one of those things that could hopefully bring about some equity. And obviously, I would want to clear their records as well as minimize the contacts with law enforcement. Criminal justice is one thing, police brutality is another thing, but they obviously are closely aligned. And so we can minimize some of those attacks and some of those encounters overall if we are decriminalizing when it comes to marijuana as well.
Yeah. Now, Texas is also among many states that are sort of enacting anti-trans bills that have really led to a lot of people leaving the state, families being really concerned about their kids. First of all, what do you think about the laws that have been passed in Texas? And secondly, what do you think Congress, or if not Congress, the Biden administration can do about it?
Yeah, so it's interesting because just yesterday, one of my forever constituents, is what I'll call her, Little Libby, was one of 4 trans teens that organized a trans prom here in DC. So I had an opportunity to see her and participate. Little Libby has been testifying, unfortunately, at the Texas House since she was 7 years old. And when I was serving in the Texas House, I actually was her representative. She's just now out of my district, but they are my family forever. If people don't start to understand that this is a human rights issue, I'm not trying to indoctrinate anyone into believing anything that they don't want to believe. But what they need to understand is that this is a fight for all of us. I, as a Black woman, as a civil rights lawyer, cannot say that I will only fight if it's a woman issue, or I'll only fight if it's a Black issue, because my fight today may be your fight tomorrow. And so I'm not asking people, it's just like when we talk about reproductive freedom, I'm not necessarily asking you to subscribe to the underlying freedom that we are fighting for, but you should subscribe to freedom overall and understand that these are human rights issues. As it relates to what the administration can do, I think that this goes to privacy again, right? When we're starting to talk about the link between repro and trans legislation, because this session they've decided they mostly were going to go after hormone blockers in most of the state houses. These are decisions that are made with local doctors. And just like reproductive decisions historically have been made with doctors, and they were indoctrinated and they were protected under the Constitution as privacy decisions. I think it's still a privacy fight. I think that we can align those two really big fights under the same umbrella. And honestly, everybody needs to join forces. Obviously we've got some issues with the Supreme Court. So I'm one of those people that's like, expand the court. I absolutely believe that we have illegitimate justices that are sitting on the court. And so I wouldn't normally say, expand the court, because I do think that that is a little bit, I don't want to call it extreme, but it's definitely out of the norm. But what we saw as relates to this court about how they even got to the court was out of the norm. And so I think one of the things that most Americans are looking for Democrats to do is match the energy of the Republicans. The Republicans went way out of the norm, broke all the rules to make sure that they could pack the Supreme Court. They disallowed, Merrick Garland was supposed to be on the Supreme Court, but they would not allow him to go through. And then at the very end of Trump's presidency, if they were following the same precedents that they followed under Obama, that meant that President Joe Biden would have had that other seat, the RBG seat. But unfortunately, they obviously changed the rules, right? So when they start changing the rules to the game and decide that they don't want to honor decorum and traditions, then I think that we should push back with the same energy. And because I feel like we had 2 seats that were stolen from Democratic presidents, and because they put on people that went before them and lied. I mean, they lied. They were asked about Roe v. Wade, and they flat out lied. I think that we need to expand the court, and we need to bring these issues up again. And hopefully we can have justices that will honor the true traditions of what it is to be a lawyer. And really, if you are going to go outside the norm of precedence, it really should be for something that is unique and different. And there was nothing unique and different about the Dobbs case.
Yeah. Uvalde was a tragedy in Texas, but there have been many others in states all across the country. Texas has moved to loosen gun laws. But states like Michigan, for example, just enacted some, pretty basic gun safety measures. What do you think Congress can learn from these 2 different examples and maybe craft some sort of compromise, either in this Congress or a future Congress, to address some of these issues?
Yeah, you're still so hopeful, which is great. But working with these people, I am not half as hopeful as you are. Because listen, the numbers are on our side, right? We can show you poll after poll after poll that shows you that the Democrats, as it relates to policies, we're winning, right? Which is why they've decided to cheat, which is why they decided that they could not win on their policies. And instead, they wanted to make sure they invoked voter suppression, voter subversion. They refused to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, especially with the renewal of, or with us coming up on a new census and creating new districts. So what did they decide? They decided they were going to cheat because they can't win on the issues, right? And so if you're winning by cheating, and your cheating means that you're creating these far right districts, then you basically have minority rule. And that's why we can't get to a compromise. If we had real representation in our state houses and in our US House, then we would see legislation that really followed the path of the people. Unfortunately, the people have been stripped of their power, but I believe in the people, and I believe that they're going to push back. Unfortunately, they're having to push harder then they should have to push. But if we were to look at legislation that makes sense, you would look at Michigan had the school shooting, and they decided that they were going to not respond in a way that somehow protected guns more than they protect people, but instead they responded in a way that says, listen, if somebody goes to court, so they're going to get due process of some sort, right? And they are before a judge, there will be a decision that will be made, and it's not a permanent decision, a temporary decision, right? Ultimately, you can come back and maybe get something more permanent as it relates to whether or not that person should have access to a firearm. This is about saving lives. And this idea that we have all these constitutional scholars that believe that the Second Amendment means that everybody can have whatever they want, whenever they want. That is not what it says at all. Every amendment is supposed to be reasonable in some sort, and we always have a balancing test. We always balance the greater good. That's the part that they always seem to forget. And Texas decided that in the wake of El Paso, the session that I was there was the first session since El Paso. So we know that we had someone who drove from north of my district, Collin County, where the most recent shooting happened in Allen, Texas. Someone drove from there, seemingly stoked by the likes of Tucker Carlson and other radicals that said, hey, this is the great white replacement theory. We've got to take all these people out that aren't white, right? Any of them, just go get them. And so he went to El Paso with that intention. It was a hate crime that was stoked by radical Republicans and their rhetoric, and he killed people. Texas had an opportunity to just do basic, simple stuff, anything, and they refused to do anything. Instead, they decided to go the opposite direction. And right after they went the opposite direction, what did we have? We ended up less than a year later, we ended up with Uvalde on May 24th, where we lost these beautiful children. And it's someone who tried to purchase a gun at 17 and was disallowed because he was too young. But you know what? Online, they had been talking about and calling him the school shooter because he had been talking about what he was going to do. And so because he could not buy a gun, he wasn't able to go and do it at 17, but he went back at 18. Now, juxtapose that with, this is the same Texas House that said that 18-year-olds are not mature enough to buy cigarettes. And so they raised the age to buy a cigarette to 21 because they're not mature enough at 18. Crazy. But they are grappling with whether or not a 21-year-old is the proper age. In fact, the governor wants to argue it's unconstitutional. Are you kidding me that this is the same chamber that decided that 21-year-olds or 18-year-olds can't have cigarettes? Yeah, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, that's crazy. So finally, Texas is a changing state, and we always think it's about to go blue, but not so much in the last election. When do you think we're going to start to see some of that change that everyone's been talking about for a decade? And do you see yourself, someday running for Senate or governor, and be part of that change?
So you have finally found the optimism in me. This is great. This is great. No. So I believe that Texas is blue. I will tell you why. Texas has more African Americans than any other state. Texas is actually a majority minority state. And I don't know of another majority minority state that actually is Republican run. But Texas is one of the lowest voter turnout states in the country. And I personally believe if we were this deeply red, then the Republicans would not work so hard to make sure that they are continually instituting new ways to suppress the vote or subvert the votes as they are cast. So they know what I know. Unfortunately, the rest of the country doesn't really believe or know it, but they know like I know. And even when we looked at our last census, 95% of the growth in the last decade was due to people of color. We only added 180,000 new Anglos. Everyone else was either AAPI, Latino or African American. And so with these demographics, we've got what we need. It's just a matter of engaging. It's very difficult and it's very expensive to engage in Texas. Obviously, landmass wise, we're huge, as well as the cost in Texas when it comes to our media markets. So when you're trying to really get your word out about your candidates and excite people and make people believe, it is very expensive to communicate to that many people. And then having the Dallas market, having the Houston market, and even San Antonio and Austin, they're not cheap, but definitely Dallas and Houston are some of the top most expensive markets in the country. And so if we get the investments, then we can do it. And also, if we run and build our bench, I think that that's more of a Democratic issue than it is necessarily a Texas specific issue, is that we've got to build the bench. You can't just wake up one day and say, hey, I'm going to run in a state of 30 million people in 254 counties and I'm going to get it done. Like, it doesn't happen that way, right? Like, you really have to build on it. And your final question about what the future holds, I'm going to tell you, honestly, I have no idea. If you would have asked me, 2 years ago, if I saw myself in Congress, I would have told you absolutely not. I thought that they were crazy up here. I still think they're crazy up here. But I definitely I didn't have that aspiration. I actually had to give up practicing law, which is something that I love and I've done for almost 2 decades, to come to Congress. But I believe that we were worth the sacrifice, and I believe that the stakes were just too high in this country. Ultimately, if that is what I'm called to do, is to run for a statewide office, then ultimately that's what I'll do. But at this point in time, I don't see it. I definitely don't see it.
I see it, even if you don't. Well, Representative Crockett, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. I really enjoyed our chat and love to hear about all your energy on all these big issues.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
You too. Take care.